Thank you very much for a series of questions we've got here. First of all, let me introduce you to our panellists, or reintroduce you to some of our panellists. On my far right, we have Adrian Peltz, the President of the National Union of Students and the Union of Students in Ireland. Next to her, Lynn Carville, the Women's Sector Lobbyist with the Women's Resource and Development Agency. I'd like to welcome back Tracy Mahag from Invest NI. And I'd also like to introduce you to Evelyn Collins, the Chief Executive of the Equality Commission. So I'm just going to, have a quick shifty at some of these questions. Actually, let me just come perhaps to Evelyn first with this one. One person has asked here, do you think that the public appointments process should be changed to ensure better female participation? And if so, how?
I also say that I nipped out to the loo in between the last two speakers and spotted a set of car keys in the loo. Not in the loo, they had the washing machine in the loo, and they had either a purple or a green leather thing on it. And one of the staff has it now in case it belongs to you, and you don't have to, admit who you are by going out immediately. But if someone leaves in the next wee file, we know who you are. Anyway, so a set of car keys. Public appointments process is. Public appointments generally are very important. It is vital that women are on public bodies which take decisions which affect all of us, and I think that should go without saying in a room like this. It's one of the areas where the Equality Commission and its predecessor, the EOC, has had a long engagement, and some of you may remember that at one point, following a Secretary of State saying that they didn't know any women to put onto public bodies, we initiated a talent bank of women to come forward to present themselves for public appointment. Clearly, since then, many public appointments now are made through public advertisement, so big job of work to ensure that sufficient numbers of women apply. But there's also a big job of work to do, and the second half of the question about the process, is to ensure that the criteria that are looked for in terms of public appointments are actually wide-ranging and reflect the full range of experience that both women and men have in Northern Ireland.
It was a little bit quiet.
So maybe if I just summarise. Yes, it's vital that women play an appropriate and equal part on the in public appointments. There are many, many decisions taken by public bodies in Ireland in health, in education, in economic development that need to have a woman's voice as well as a men's voice. Women's appointments are sitting at around a third at the moment, and it's been remarkably sticky at around a third for some considerable time. We are at the moment actually working with John Keeney following a case last year that wasn't about gender equality but was about the public appointments process, to look at ensuring that the public appointments process is fair and is open and encouraging to ensure that there's a greater diversity of public appointments generally. And I'd say that's also true for other areas like young people, reflecting on what Adrian was saying earlier. There isn't very many young people also serving on public bodies, and it's vital that there too. But certainly women have a huge role to play and that needs to be addressed.
Can I just ask Tracy, because you spoke very persuasively about trying to get better female representation in the boardroom, and yet when we look at Invest in Ireland, Invest NI itself, of your 12 board members, only one is a woman. Is there a responsibility on organisations as well to show leadership in this area?
Absolutely. So the last time we went out actually for board members, I personally contacted individuals who I thought would have the talent to bring to the table and encourage them to apply. Because to be frank with you, whilst we want more women at the table, we want more talent at the table, and it's not women at all costs. So we do have to go out there and actually, encourage the talented female with the ability to apply for these positions. These things will not be, to be honest with you, in the business community side of the house, you very quickly start to run out of female chief executives in large organisations very quickly. And therefore your actual pool is smaller. So it's just thinking within that, who has the experience to come in and reaching out to them. I know our board, by the way, would welcome more female participation, so it's not a question of the board not wanting it, but we all have a responsibility, as you say, and to encourage.
Well, there's a hint there if anybody wants to sit on the board of Invest NI. I mean, some of what we've talked about here would almost lead us to suggest that perhaps what we need to look at is positive discrimination, which has always been a very controversial issue. Another question that's come forward here, how legitimate is it in Northern Ireland to consider women-only recruitment? And this is particularly in the context of a large public sector organisation employing 220,000 plus staff, only 1% of them being female and 99% male. Lynn, could I ask you, is it something that we think we can look at, women-only recruitment?
It's not so, I'm down to know what organisation is that? Oh, okay. It's good. Ooh. I do believe, and I've come to the conclusion that that we need to be properly represented in all areas of work, in the public sector, particularly in public boards and in politics. And to jump quicker to realise this, that I do actually believe in quotas. And I understand, and I know I've discussed this when I was younger, people's automatic reaction to quotas is resistance, and that's just a natural reaction to it, and that's okay. But the more that you look at it, the more important it actually becomes. Otherwise, we are going to be behind for a very, very long time. So an organisation that is 1% female, it's not a healthy organisation. I would just say that. I mean, and I come obviously from a sector that's almost, not totally, but almost 100% female. I know that there's actually a couple of men in here have worked in the women's sector, and it's not healthy. I don't believe it's actually healthy, but it's a very, very important kind of part to, it's like a stepping stone to move on into other things. So I believe that diversity is really, really important, and if it's going to take measures like all-female shortlist that you recruit from that, well then so be it.
But Evelyn, how can we equate that with equality legislation if we're actually then looking to try and recruit women only?
Yeah, I think the question was how legitimate is it, and of course the answer is it's not lawful to do that, and I know Lynn wasn't addressing that in a particular point, but
clearly it's vital that all public sector and private sector organisations do have diversity and a better gender balance. And it's interesting when you look at areas that have been traditionally male dominated, like for example the police service in Northern Ireland, you can see that because of the whole modernising agenda within the police and the very vigorous recruitment that took place to the police in a sustained way over a period, in terms of numbers, that the number of women police officers, or the percentage of women police officers, has moved from around 10% in 1998 to over a quarter now. So that was obviously not addressed specifically by the 50-50 recruitment, which was on community background, but clearly the whole outreaching and modernisation programme and the availability of jobs can initiate change in areas, and we've seen some changes in areas too, like the senior civil service, slow and steps. So we'll talk to the fire service. We're engaged with the fire service on a number of issues, obviously in terms of diversity, and that's an area where we're particularly interested in non-traditional areas for women.
Adrian, you talked very extensively about the kind of issues that women, particularly in education, are facing, and also Michael was asking us to think about, where are the young women's voices coming through with that sort of gender awareness. Some of the difficulties that we seem to face is actually awareness of gender issues amongst people considerably younger than myself, for example. So I'm thinking particularly of some of the surveys we've had in recent years at Queen's, where a worryingly high percentage of young people thought that, for example, a woman was asking to be sexually assaulted if she was drunk or if she was dressed in certain clothing. How can you address those kind of issues with young people who we might all assume have taken on some of the lessons that we've all learned?
Sorry, it's really difficult because in some ways the feminist argument has encouraged young women to think that it is completely one and that we do have a state of equality. And when you look at the statistics, like the number of young women participating in higher education, it is very easy to rest on your laurels and say, oh, well, actually, yes, women are getting a fair share and they're getting a better deal. But I think the key thing here is about the kind of demographic that you're looking at. The main, and I say this as a fairly middle-class white woman myself, the main beneficiaries of feminism have been middle-class women, and we still are leaving behind more vulnerable women from working-class backgrounds, from, as I said, the free school meal young girls who don't have that kind of equality ethos in the family, and who also aren't benefiting from going to...
These were Queen's students, so these are fairly well off, generally white. I mean, these are the people that we would expect to have taken on this kind of thing. How do you address that?
I think that's a challenge that the entire sector needs to look at, and certainly from our perspective, we have a gender strategy within the organisation, which we have a women's campaign which actively tackles feminist issues on campuses. We work with various departments and are lobbying really, really hard to get a more sort of honest opinion on feminism integrated into education, because we do think that we are passing the buck a little bit and saying that feminism has been won and that true equality has been achieved. And I do think that there is something about the issue that most women nowadays, particularly in my age group, will only face their first serious discrimination when it comes to childbearing age. So, and because a lot of that is about the fact that women are having children much later in life. We know that the average age is going up, so women in my age group tend to not really experience that kind of direct discrimination, which would probably get them a little bit more fired up. But we're educating young women, and we are telling them that actually the gender pay gap is probably the best example of gender inequality. And the minute it seems as though the minute you do put it into a financial context, young women actually do realise that this is a massive problem, and it is something that we need to tackle.
Tracy, another question here, quite specifically about actually the construction industry. OFM-DFM announced a job creation strategy that focused heavily on the construction industry. When asked how women would benefit from this, I was told that women would be service users. So this person is asking, outside of consultation responses, how can we further heighten demands for women's economic inclusion?
By demonstrating the evidence that there's a value of it to the organisation. Obviously, our role is working with business. And it doesn't matter what the message is, whether it's, be better with your energy, like, yeah, okay. Better with your energy and it saves you money. Oh, right, okay. Recruit female talent because it makes sense for your business is the message we need to get out there for business people. Also what we do is we ensure that when we're running programs, we have specifically targeted messages to women. So we don't set ourselves targets for the number of women on the programme, but we make sure that we have a bespoke targeting message. So, for example, our particularly fast growth programme, which we're coming up with, will have a separate marketing campaign aimed at women to get more women to actually self-select. So, to be frank with you, the aggressive just do it just doesn't work. Whatever the message is, it has to actually be given in a way which the audience actually see the benefit to them, and the fact is the evidence demonstrates there is a benefit.
Another question that was been put through to us here, which I'll throw open to the panel. Given the obvious and lifelong impact of motherhood on women's economic independence, which many people have raised as part of their speech, does the panel agree that the issue of a woman's access to reproductive rights should form part of this debate? In particular, a woman's right to choose whether to have children, and if so, when to have them. Is it acceptable for these rights to be so limited in Northern Ireland?
I'll jump in first because I know it's quite a scary topic for a lot of people to address. I think that it's critical that we're honest about women's choices and the availability of reproductive rights, actually, particularly for young women. And again, it comes back to the vulnerability of young women, because we know that the number of women who do have to go and terminate pregnancies are usually from more deprived backgrounds. So yes, I absolutely think that we should be prioritising parity of reproductive rights with the rest of the UK. I think that a woman being able to choose how she economically engages is incredibly important, and we all know that hinges on whether or not they are having to support a child. I myself, as a single mum, have struggled massively financially. My daughter's 7, and for the years prior to having full-time employment, it was incredibly difficult. I was very lucky to be able to have the support of, a very inclusive family. However, a lot of women who find themselves in these positions are not as lucky as I was, and don't have those kind of support backgrounds and the financial input from various family members. So I absolutely think that the link between reproductive rights and economic rights is incredibly intertwined, in fact. And I think, it's about time that the Northern Ireland government owns up to this and develops some clear guidelines.
Lynn. Okay. I suppose this is not something I often address within my day-to-day work, because if I did, I would be immediately put to one side and go, that's all that I do, and then my work around welfare reform or childcare or anything else, in fact, in Stormont would be absolutely ignored. So I do tend to stay away from it, but absolutely applaud people who do take it on. But I mean, I've come to that realisation. But there absolutely are links between reproductive rights and women's economic independence. And I mean, one of the, if you look at how the tax and the benefit system is operating currently, I mean, we are putting, the UK government are putting women, making women actively seek work when their youngest child is 1 now within this new context of welfare reform. And that means you're actively in the labour market, competing with people with no children and just with men who don't have those caring responsibilities. So the way things are going is that you're not being supported to either stay at home. We have a situation in Northern Ireland where we don't have the adequate levels of childcare at all either. So, and to juxtaposition that maybe with a case in Germany at the moment where they're upping child benefit to try and raise actually the population to make women have children. So there's absolutely very, very clear links. But women are not supported currently through our tax and benefit systems across the UK.
I think it clearly is an important issue too, and actually dealt with. Clearly, can you hear me? Clearly a very important issue, and actually dealt with, and I mean part of the context for our discussion today is the CEDAW examination of the UK come July. Article 12 of CEDAW talks about access to healthcare, and the Equality Commission, certainly when it was doing its 2008 shadow report, looked at this issue and called for the same access to reproductive healthcare in Northern Ireland as in the rest of the UK. People who are following the UN committee work closely will know that the concluding observations covered the important need for a public debate, and the government to initiate a public debate in Northern Ireland about that. We're having that at the moment, for whether it's Mary Stopes Clinic or the Criminal Justice Bill and the Family Planning Association's attempt to get the Department of Health to produce guidelines. So there's a lot going on. The Equality Commission decided last year, in thinking about it, the areas it wanted to cover for its CEDAW shadow report this year, to cover areas relating very clearly to women's economic security, education, public participation, economic and social benefits, older women, special measures to accelerate equality. So that's where we've been working over the last while, but we will, and the discussion is live in the Commission at the moment about whether we also look at that Article 12 issue again, because obviously it is an important issue in its own right.
Thank you. Tracy, another question from the audience here, which I direct to you, if I may. What steps would the panel suggest could be taken to make women entrepreneurs more numerous and visible in the public domain, particularly in the media? I know you did address some of this in your talk, but
it is frankly the role modelling. We do have to actually make people more aware of the role models and get more messages out there. The women's networking is very effective. We have the Women's Network here with us today, and some of us need help more than others. And I think there are women in society that actually feel very independent, and they don't feel they need those support infrastructures, but they need to understand that a lot of women do need them. And, when I went along to the networks, I really saw the benefit of the women's networking, the little bit of mentoring. And one of the things that comes across really quickly is it's a huge relief to them when they realise other people feel the same way as they do. So, because everybody thinks, they're the only one in the room that actually doesn't believe in themselves. And that self-belief thing, which is one of the things we talked about, the 3 aspects of why women are not actually becoming entrepreneurs, is they don't actually believe they have the skills. They don't see the opportunity. But actually, I think women are in a fantastic position to see the opportunity. And we are trying very hard, we're working very hard with the Women's Networks and other people to actually promote these role models. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to actually put more women out there. And the problem is there's not enough of them, and the poor ones that we pull on keep coming back again and again and again. So it's like, getting visibility, I suppose, and sharing visibility with us about these women, so that we can actually get those messages out there.
I think our last one from the floor, though we may have time to ask some questions live, as it were. This, I suppose, is the key question, in a sense, of the entire morning, is how can we get our fair share at the micro level, and particularly in relation to childcare, which I think seems to be the issue that pretty much everybody has brought up as being the starting point for women being able to move forward on so many levels. I throw this open to everybody. How can we encourage or get more of those opportunities there? I mean, maybe actually, Evelyn, you'd like to start, because certainly Stormont's or OFM DFM's consultation on the childcare strategy, which is still only a consultation towards a strategy, doesn't really take us very far forward.
No. I think all the speakers have talked about the importance of adequate, affordable, quality childcare, and that's key. And wasn't it good to see it actually referenced in the programme for government when it was brought forward last year? The consultation, which closes today or yesterday, was entitled Towards a Childcare Strategy. And for those of you who have looked at it in our response, and I think a summary of our response is in the packs, there is still a fair bit of work to do to get really clear ideas and objectives for the childcare strategy in place. So that's what, along with ideas about the policy direction of childcare, we've said in our response that OFM DFM should, when gathering what I hope, I am sure, will be very valuable information from across Northern Ireland, should shape the objectives and priorities for the childcare strategy, and consult again. It ought to do that quite quickly, because there is a pressing need for good quality, affordable, accessible childcare in Northern Ireland.
If I could maybe just come in here. I think what we need to recognise is that it's going to cost, and I'm not sure that that's really, sunk in yet in terms of, in Stormont and across department. Childcare is going to cost, and I haven't managed to see any other country where universal childcare is available where it is not subsidised to some level. So it has to be subsidised. The key issue in Northern Ireland is it's not access is an issue, and particularly in rural areas, but there is childcare provision. It just costs a fortune. It's an absolute fortune. So you see, statistically, you see women leaving work when they have 3 children. 2, you're hanging on by your fingernails. 3, you're outside of the labour market. And all of that, and you'll agree, Tracy, that the loss of talent and experience over years, but it becomes completely just financially non-viable. So we have a nascent women's budget group that Brona talked about this morning, and we really want to see the childcare strategy or childcare provision embedded within the economic strategy. It's not even mentioned. Completely unbelievable. That's where the money is. It matters because if our programme for government is about economic growth and growing our economy, you are not going to grow the economy without childcare. It's just not going to happen, because women aren't going to be in work. So we want to see it there. But I say this every time I'm speaking. I was in Sweden a couple of weeks ago. Now to tell everybody the story. And there's universal childcare provision. And I went over to learn about childcare. And when I asked about it, they were like, it's just a non-issue. It's an absolute non-issue. Every child has a childcare place, and it's absolutely not a gender issue, which just blew me away. It's all completely embedded within the UNCRC, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and every child has a childcare place. And so all women are in work, and that's just the way it is. So I just think we need to take a few more steps forward, but realise it's going to cost.
I should make a plug for our research. Sorry, I should make a plug for the research happened in Northern Ireland, but also looking what's happened in other countries where it's clear that it's a vastly different situation. So good to look at that research too.
Adrian, can women put pressure on institutions to provide childcare? I mean, I don't know what the childcare arrangements at Queen's are, but is that something that actively we can do as groups?
Well, I was just going to say that actually, one of the things that you can do from an education perspective is engage with the institution to increase the amount of money that they invest in and subsidise in childcare. But I do think that, particularly from an employment perspective, I think that perhaps what we need to start doing, and one day if we have more women CEOs in Northern Ireland, we will perhaps adopt a more flexible approach to work where it doesn't have to be between 9 to 5, because I think alongside the childcare strategy and having affordable childcare, I think that we need to look at actually the way that we work, and it doesn't necessarily have to be between a 9 to 5 hour, and perhaps more women CEOs, which is why we absolutely need to have more women in these positions of power, to kind of implement these things in the business sector. I think the private sector has a massive role to play in both, subsidising and encouraging more flexible working practices. And I suppose the Department of Employment and Learning, again, in much the same way that the economic strategy completely overlooks childcare, they've completely overlooked childcare from an education perspective. So I think that childcare and the subsidy needs to be completely linked to the way that we learn. We need more free nursery places for young children, particularly in their core age group, and a far higher subsidy for students, because one of the key things that I hear from particularly mature learners is that one of the major barriers to upskilling and reskilling after changing occupations is that often women have children in a very awkward age between 9 and 16, and they just cannot fit in studying alongside working, and they have to make the choice of either staying a low paid or retraining, but having to pay a hefty amount for childcare. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Well, that's the end of our questions, our written questions. We've, I think, about sort of 5 minutes more before Evelyn closes proceedings for us. Is there anything that's been thrown up by what our speakers have said that anybody else would like to ask? Any areas we haven't covered? Oh, Una, perhaps at the very grand. Sorry, Una at the back there. Hang on. Oh, lovely.
Hi, I was just wondering, do the panel think that the representation and participation of women in the media in Northern Ireland has a detrimental effect on women here getting a fair share?
You might ask Julia that.
Well, it's certainly, there's an issue around, I do some training with young people as well who are interested in getting into the media, and whilst it's one of those areas that's incredibly seductive, shall we say, I think there are issues around actually training young people when there aren't going to be positions for them, particularly not potentially on the island of Ireland anyway. And it's, all of us that work in various forms of the media, whether it be broadcast or print, have seen a gradual erosion of the numbers of people working in different organisations. So it's, those opportunities are shrinking, and of course when opportunities are shrinking, as we've all discussed, it's hard for women to get their fair share. And there is an issue around actually seeing women on your screen. Tracy talked very clearly there about role models. There's nothing like seeing a woman on television, and perhaps not even just a presenter, but somebody actually doing something. And this was a particular issue for us on Hearts and Minds, which was a political programme. And often it was very difficult to find women interviewees. So I would go around looking for people to speak in the films that I made, and desperately tried to find women, and struggling a great deal. And yet in many areas we know many CEOs, for example, in the community and voluntary sector are women. So there's some sort of disconnect going on there, which we need to address in terms of actually just seeing women talking about issues. And I know one of the organisations that Una is also championing, there's an organisation based in Britain called the Women's Room UK, which is actually appealing for women experts to come forward and sign up to be people who can be interviewed for different issues. And again, I think it's the issue of whether women think they can do something sometimes. And yet, let me tell you, if you ask a man to do an interview, present company accepted, but a man will always do an interview, whether he really knows what he's talking about or not. So I think we need to encourage more women, when they have an area of expertise, to do that and to say yes to doing those interviews. So that's my small plug. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add to that.
No, I agree. I think that one of the things, I mean, if we want to get our messages across, we really have to put ourselves out there. And more recently, the BBC invited a few women down to take away being terrified, you know, to go around in places. And I asked that question actually. I said, what way do men react here? And she says, they're completely terrified, but they would never say it. Whereas women just, you know, will say it and really are self-deprecating and will not put themselves forward. But, you know, we do have to push ourselves. But then the other thing is you have to ask why. So if there were more female role models there, would it be easier for us to put ourselves forward? You know, it's a vicious circle, but work needs to be done, definitely.
And the media, the media plays such a powerful role in all our lives. The various ways in which we receive messages or information or news. So, you know, ensuring that there's equal representation of women and greater diversity generally in the media, whether as presenters or as expert commentators, is critical, and not just in the areas where, you know, journalists think that women will be interested in, but women. I was watching last night Stephanie Flanders talking about economic issues on the main news. These are important areas for women also to be commenting on, and not just kind of traditional areas. So in all aspects of the media, greater diversity is key.
Perhaps one more question? Perhaps the lady down here?
Hello, it's Orton. Wanted to say about using the media to help your cause. You can actually tweet the House of Lords and have a debate on there, and they can then send that debate to the House of Lords for debate to help in the legislative process, because this is where this all stems from. And I mean, you can have your debates on whatever organisation you're from or individually, because I've done so in the past. I just wanted to say about the Working Time Directive for women as well. It's ratified by the UK, and we're part of the UK through default procedures, as you know. It's ratified to the TFEU, it's a Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, which gives the time scales of women's working hours per year, per day, you know, time off for pregnancies, maternity, things like that. The EU law has actually supremacy over domestic legislation, and women need to understand that they can use that legislation to argue their cases, whether in employment tribunals or just directly to their employers, to give them a bit of ammunition. I just feel that's very important to say all that. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Actually, Anne, perhaps at the back there, then. I think we should have a gentleman.
Hi, my name is Orla Hendren. I work for Here and I. It's not actually a question, it's more of a comment. I mean, we've heard today, obviously we're talking about the discrimination that women are facing, and we did hear mentioned women with disabilities and women from ethnic minorities. And I just wanted to say something about women who identify as lesbian or bisexual, because quite often they're the most overlooked group within the women's sector. And I just wanted to remind people to be mindful of that when you are doing your work and your processes, to bear in mind that, you know, it's quite a sizable minority, about 5% of the population in Northern Ireland are lesbian and bisexual women, so it's about 100,000 women that we're talking about, and we're largely overlooked. So just to remind people to be mindful of that and to try and engage more with lesbian and bisexual women.
There was a gentleman asking a question.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Paul Doran from Harrison Solicitors. I'm a man and I'm terrified to ask, but I'm going to ask anyway.
It's not deterring you.
I have an interest in these issues both professionally and personally. I've worked on equal pay cases in England for the last 10 years. There's been a requirement on local authorities to revamp their pay structures, but unfortunately from my personal experience I've witnessed that while they have been changing to a certain extent, there remains a pay gap between men and women, even in the lowest paid jobs. On a personal level, my wife has recently qualified as a mental health nurse and suffered some of the issues that Adrian has alluded to. in that she had to train on a pittance of a bursary, and when qualified, her and all of her colleagues in her year were only able to avail of fixed-term contracts within the NHS, and they also found themselves massively overworked on wards. So my question really is just to Evelyn, to sort of what role what steps are the Commission taking to deal with this sort of institutional discrimination within pay structures and terms and conditions in huge state bodies such as local authorities and NHS trusts?
Thanks. I could be here all day giving you the answer. I mean, people know that equal pay has been a right for women since 1957, since the Treaty of Rome set it up, and then when, of course, UK and Ireland joined the EEC as it was then since 1973. There's been an Equal Pay Act since 1970, yet there is a stubborn pay gap between women and men, and it varies depending on the sector, varies depending on the occupational sector and the industrial sector. In Northern Ireland, it's actually slightly less than it is in GB because of high proportion of women in the public sector. That said, when you are receiving less pay for a job of equal value or equal worth than a man, then it's very problematic. What we're doing is, in addition to assisting individual cases, and Brona had mentioned earlier that we've seen some increase in complaints to us on equal pay over the last few years, I can happily share that very recently OFM DFM, which has a role, although we're an independent equality body, it has a role under some aspects of the legislation, has approved our Equal Pay Code of Practice, which we have revised in light of case law and developments over the last few years. So we will be releasing that in the next short while, whenever it's finished its process through the Assembly of Being Laid and so on, and engaging in a fairly major programme of work to encourage organisations to take steps to address unequal pay that is within their pay structure. So I could almost, people might think, I set you up to ask that question. I've never met you, but it's a very important area of work and will be the focus of significant attention for the Equality Commission going forward, as we have now had our revised Equal Pay Code approved, and it's one of the issues that we're obviously also going to be covering in our CEDAW shadow report. But good question, and watch this space is the answer.
I think that might be a good time to wrap up, because we're already running sort of 15 minutes over, and I'm sure everybody's getting a bit hungry. Just before we do that, I'd like to ask Evelyn, the Chief Executive of the Equality Commission, to come up to the microphone just so she can formally finish proceedings. But thank you very much for your questions.
Now, I only want to take a minute or two. I mean, obviously we set out this morning and invited people to come with the aim of discussing issues which impact on women's economic independence. We've had wide-ranging, excellent contributions, I hope you agree with me, from all our speakers. We've had a good platform for debate, and we've had some very good questions from the floor, and I'm sorry that I sensed you were all just about to get going on a debate, and we certainly give a commitment to have more occasions like this going forward. I think what we've heard this morning is that it's a very, very important moment for gender equality, a very important moment for us to focus our energies and our attention. We have the Programme for Government of the Executive, which has both growing the economy and developing childcare and a range of other equality strategies as important. It is underpinned by equality considerations. So that's an important bedrock for our work. We have the Towards a Childcare consultation just closed, opportunities there to influence things for the better. We have, as the Minister said earlier, the review of the gender equality strategy, which is ongoing at present, and it of course was drafted first, and the gender action plans were drafted first back in 2006, so there really is a need to review in light of the changed circumstances and developments since 2006, not least the financial crisis. And we also have the Welfare Reform Bill. Lynn mentioned that the DSD committee concluded its report last week. It will be going back through the legislative process now. We have raised concerns, as others have, around universal credit, around housing benefit, around lone parent conditionality, around disability benefits, about the quality of the Equality Impact Assessment, and we'll continue our focus on that. It's also an important moment because of the CEDAW
reporting progress. You know, you've heard that in July the UK government will include, the UK government will be examined on progress being made, and that will include being made in Northern Ireland. I thought it was very valuable to hear this morning that Minister Jennifer McCann welcomes the CEDAW examination, welcomed a reasoned critical review of performance of the Northern Ireland Executive on gender equality as a basis for going forward and making improvements. And I think certainly collectively we have a real job of work to do together to ensure that what goes forward to the CEDAW committee enables it to examine the UK's performance and Northern Ireland's performance in an informed way. And certainly we in the Equality Commission are very committed, as Michael said earlier, to ongoing engagement, ongoing talking, ongoing listening as we move through the next period, not just up to the CEDAW period, but we want to be both informed by concerns from women across Northern Ireland and ensure that the CEDAW process is a robust one. So engagement and partnership working is the buzzwords, and I think on your table we've asked you for more ideas. We're engaged in lots of partnership activities at the moment, but any ideas you have for further ones we're happy to consider. And my final point is the thanks to people. Thanks to all our speakers, Tracy, Brona, Adrian and Lynn, all terrific, expert and informative and persuasive in their inputs. Thank all of you for coming this morning and participating in our event today. Really special thanks to our video stars, both Nuala Crilly and Luna's over here all morning and Lynn is here. Thank you very much for your inputs and obviously Adrian, Bridget, Natalie and Pauline who are not here. Very important, and they'll all be getting value from that on our website going forward. Thanks also to Julia, Paul, who of course we all know from the Hearts and Minds, but very vital role you've played this morning in keeping comparing for us, Julia. So thank you for that. And thanks also, because events like this don't just happen, thanks also to our staff who have all been looking so well and being so efficient all morning here. And of course to the staff of Little Hall, as I just discovered, as Michael had said to you earlier, actually was a venue for women students back in 100 years ago. What a special place to be this morning. So thank you all again for coming, thanks everybody for their participation, and look forward to ongoing conversations. Thank you.